Okay. All right. So I promised, and I will keep this class short, certainly over, in time for anybody who wants to watch the State of the Union address to do so. Find the Shema in your Siddur. It'd be 138 in the weekday Siddur, probably 202 in the full Siddur.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And I wanted, there are a few things, there's a lot that you could talk about, especially when you're talking about the Shema. And there was stuff that I neglected to mention when we looked at this last week. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, you see above the Shema itself, right? There are three words that you add if there's no minion, right? You see that? El, Melech, Ne'eman. Okay, and which means God is a faithful judge, okay, or God, not judge, ruler, sovereign king. All right, so God is a faithful king. Now, the question is, why do we say these words when there's no minion? Okay, I don't know if any of you have ever wondered about that before. But does anybody know, or has anybody learned, or even want to take a guess at why we say these words when there's no minion? Yeah, D, just
really off the wall. So that whether we have a minion or not, we are constantly acknowledging God. I don't quite have the words to what I'm trying to say. As opposed to feeling, well, if there's no minion, then it doesn't count.
uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it's like we're invoking God, right? And after all, when that's actually very good, because when we say the Shema, right, one of the terms that the rabbis use for this is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, okay, which means acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, right? We're acknowledging God as our sovereign, as our ruler, okay? But there's one, and I'll say one and a half other reasons that we say this, okay? And to understand this, I mean, when we don't have a minion, right, we have services anyway with the Shliach Tzibur, the leader, saying things out loud, and so on and so forth. I mean, we don't say the things that require a minion, right? But traditionally, if you didn't have a minion, everybody would just daven on their own. You wouldn't have somebody leading services, okay? And technically, that's actually what you're doing. You're davening on your own. If there's no minion, you're just davening on your own, like together in unison in the same place. So not really on your, right? But if this were like an Orthodox shul and we didn't have a minion, I'd say everybody just daven by yourself. All right, so if you go to the end of the Shema, right? So that'd be on the subsequent page, right? It says, right? So the last phrase of the third paragraph of the Shema is Ani Adonai Elohechem, right? And then, at least if you have the weekday Siddur, in brackets, you have the word emet, right? Which is not part of the Shema, right? But when we finish the Shema with a minyan, the Shaliach Tzibor, the service leader, says, Adonai Elohechem Emet, right? Your God is truth. Your God is a true God. Says in English here, I am Adonai, your God, who is truth. Any of those translations would be correct. Okay, so if you don't have a minyan, you don't say those three words. Okay, so instead of the three words at the end, we have these three words at the beginning, El Melech Ne'eman. Okay, and what that does, this is a little bit like woo-woo stuff, right? But counting those three words, either the three words at the end, Adonai Elohechem Emet, or at the beginning, El Melech Ne'eman, there are 248 words in the three paragraphs of the Shema. All right, 248 words. And so the El Melech Ne'eman keeps it at 248 when we've taken out the Adonai Elohechem Emet. Okay, 248 words. Okay, now the question, and now we get like really woo-woo, right? D, I see your hand going, so you're going to, right? Why is it important that there be 248 words in the three paragraphs of the Shema? Anybody have any idea? If so, you win a major prize.
I had the question, I don't have the answer.
Okay, well, you're halfway there. Okay, according to the sages, right, there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah, right? Everybody knows there are 613 mitzvot, but every sage who's tried to give a listing of the exact mitzvot, they don't agree. They don't agree on what the 613 mitzvot are, but as they say in the Talmud, Kule Alma La Plige. Okay, I don't know how good your Aramaic is, but everyone agrees. Literally, the whole world does not disagree, right? That there are 613 mitzvot. Furthermore, there are 248 positive mitzvot, right? Mitzvot that say thou shalt, right? Things that you are required to do, 248, and negative mitzvot prohibitions, 365. Okay, so 365, right? Everybody knows what the significance of the number 365 is, right? That's days of the year, right? And even if you would say, but wait, the Hebrew calendar is different, by the time of the Talmud, that by the time of the Mishnah, they knew that there were 365 days in a solar year. Okay, a lunar year has 354, right? But so let's just eliminate 11 mitzvot. No, they knew that in a solar year there's 365 mitzvot. All right, so there is one negative mitzvah for every day of the year. Now, what is the significance of the number 248? I would be very surprised if anybody knew this. Okay. According to the sages, there are 248 parts of the human body. Okay. Based on nothing at all. Right? That meaning like between bones and organs, you get 248. Again, I haven't seen an exact list of what those 248 parts are, but there are 248 parts of the body. Okay, so you have one positive mitzvah for every part of the body, and one negative mitzvah for every day of the year, and together they add up to 613. So it's important to keep the Shema at 248 words. So if you take 3 words off at the end, you want to add 3 words off at the beginning. Add 3 words on at the beginning, I should say. I should note I'm a little drowsy. Okay, we had to take Rashi to the emergency vet last night, and we were there until midnight. But he's okay. He's okay. We're $428 poorer, but the dog is fine. So I usually go to bed around 9, not midnight. But at any rate, so the other thing is that when you're not praying with a minyan, right? So the prayer right before, which ends Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael, right? And then you say Amen. You say Amen to the Shaliach Tzibur who's leading the service, right? If there's nobody leading the service, you don't say Amen, right? Okay. But actually, by saying El Melech Ne'eman, you sort of do. Because look at that phrase, El Melech Ne'eman, right? Look at the first letter of each of the 3 words. Sue, you're shaking your head, right? It makes Amen. So by saying El Melech Ne'eman, the acrostic of El Melech Ne'eman is Amen. Okay. Now these are just, like I say, I don't know that this adds anything to your spiritual life, but it's cool little pieces of Shema trivia. Okay.
Abby, could you repeat
What?
something? Could you repeat something that you said?
Yeah.
You said that there was, if I understood you correctly, one positive mitzvot per body part, being
Correct.
248. What did you
Right.
say about the other figures in terms of the negative?
365 negative mitzvot or prohibitions,
One per day.
one
Okay.
for each day of the year, of
Okay.
the solar year.
Thank you.
Sure.
And what does
All right.
amen translate to?
Amen.
It's true.
It is true. It is valid. I agree. I consent.
Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, so the rationale, and we'll talk more about this when we study the Amida. Okay, but remember that throughout most of the history of the Siddur, right? And we've established that the Siddur, the structure and content of the Siddur goes back 1,800 years at a minimum, right? Probably longer than that. And the oldest actual Siddurim that we have are from like the 7th to 9th centuries. Okay, so, well over 1,000 years old, right? And again, they are very, very similar to the Siddurim that we use today. Okay, but remember also that for most of the history of the Siddur, most people did not own a Siddur, right? And why is that?
A lot of reasons. No money, no printer, no writer, no freedom to do so.
All right, primarily no printing, right? I mean, there might have been errors where the Christian rulers suppressed the Siddur or whatever, but no printing. And as a corollary of that, the Siddur is handwritten, so therefore quite expensive, right? And most people can't afford one, even if one, could be obtained, right? So the real reason why we do the services the way we do with one person, and I should add that, like, the way we Ashkenazim do it, where the leader only says the first few and last few words of each prayer, the way the Sfaradim do it, every word is said out loud. Okay, which is actually more proper, because the assumption is that not everybody has a Siddur. And if not everybody has a Siddur, then you have to hear the Shaliach Tzibur, say the words of the prayers, right? And then at the end of each prayer, you say Amen, right? Which basically, like, it's similar. It's a little complicated, right? But linguistically, the N and the T sound are very close. Actually, if you pay attention to the way your tongue is placed, N, T, very, very close, right? So sometimes as language develops, an N can become a T or vice versa, right? So Amen is related to the word emet, truth, okay? And also, like, if you want to say, like, the song I Believe, right, is Ani Ma'amin, right? Ani Ma'amin. So basically, when you say Amen, you're saying, yeah, this is true. I believe this, right? And if you don't have a Siddur and you just hear somebody else say that prayer and you say Amen, it counts as if you had said it, right? And we still do that sometimes, like once a meal together and somebody says Hamotzi, right? Everybody doesn't have to say their own Hamotzi, right? You've listened to one person say Hamotzi, and you say Amen, and it's as if you said Hamotzi. You listen to somebody say the Kiddush, you say Amen, it's as if you said the Kiddush, right? It counts. Okay, so that's the role of the phrase or the word Amen, right? So El Melech Ne'eman is the acrostic of El Melech Ne'eman gives you Amen. Okay, so that's like two pieces of Shema trivia that most Jews don't know. Okay, now I'm going to give you the third piece of Shema trivia that most Jews don't know, the significance of which I have no idea or no insight into, because I am far from an expert in poetry, but right, everybody's familiar with the term or the concept of a haiku, right? Right? It's a form of poetry, 5 syllables,
Sure.
7 syllables, 5 syllables, right? Guess what? The Shema is a haiku. Shema Yisrael, 5. Adonai Eloheinu, 7. Adonai Echad. Right? Shema is a haiku. I don't know what to do with that, but it is, and it's kind of cool. Dee, you're saying something, but you are muted.
It's okay. It's probably meaningless anyway. When you compare the performance of the service from Ashkenaz and Sephard, why, this is a goofy question, why is one way doing it all and the other way the shortcut only? And I always had the question of how come whoever's leading service will always give the first opening line or two and then the end. And the answer I got at one point, I don't remember if it came from Mike Goldman or somebody, it was just a place marker. That, is that right? Did I
Yeah,
understand?
it's to keep everybody at the same place.
Okay.
All right. I have no, I mean, there are just different traditions. And sometimes the different traditions have to do with like even the climate where the tradition arose, right? Or food preferences, right? Like one thing, like Sfaradim go out of their way to eat lamb as the main course of the Pesach Seder, right? Whereas Ashkenazim avoid lamb at the Pesach Seder. Well, guess what? I mean, in the Sephardic countries, lamb is like a common thing that people eat all the time, right? In the Ashkenazi countries, up until recently, whoever ate lamb, right? Similarly, they allow rice on Pesach. Rice for them is a staple food. It's not a staple food in Russia, right? It's not a staple food. They're not growing rice in Russia. Okay, but so on that same, like, if I were to, ask myself, well, what is the difference, right? I'm going to guess that printing became widespread in Ashkenaz well before it became widespread in Sfard, right? I mean, Gutenberg was not living in Morocco, right? He was living in Germany. Okay, so I suspect that printing became more widespread earlier in Ashkenaz, and therefore everybody having their own Siddur became more widespread, and therefore the role of the Shaliach Tzibur evolved in, like, we don't need you to say the whole prayer anymore because we got the book right in front of us. Just keep us at the same pace. I suspect that's it. I have not read anything about this at all, but it makes sense to me, right? To think that that's the reason. All right, so last thing that on my list of things about the Shema for tonight. So again, look at the Shema itself line and how it's printed, and what do you notice about how it's printed?
The the last letters of Shema, Yisrael, and Echad are printed larger.
Right, not Yisrael. That's a regular size lamed, actually.
Oh,
but yes, the last
okay.
Right, the last letter of the first word and the last word are printed large. Okay.
Is that why? One of the first things I asked when I started coming to services, why does anybody say echad in an emphatic way? Is that something to do with the size of the print?
It's connected. Yeah, it's connected. Okay, so now the thing is, you could say, well, that's maybe just in the prayer book, but actually in the Torah scroll itself, it's also written that way. Okay, with a large ayin and a large dalet. Okay, now, question, why? Answer goes back to the Masoretes. Okay, so about, hundreds of years. But there are two sort of reasons that are given. Okay, now you probably all heard me say, every Jewish practice has two reasons: the official reason and the real reason. Right? I don't know which is official and which is real, but okay, so if you look at the word Shema, Shin Mem Ayin, right? Now the Ayin and the Aleph sound similar, right? Right? In Hebrew school, you learn that they're both silent letters, right? The ayin actually is not a silent letter. It has a sound, but Ashkenazi Jews can't pronounce it. Only Sfaradim can pronounce it, but it's a kind of thing. And like just as a piece of trivia, right? The place, God help us all, known as Gaza in English is Gaza with an ayin in Hebrew and in Arabic. Okay, which tells you that whoever in Latin or English or whatever heard the ayin as a sort of G. Okay. So that's why Gaza, Aza. Okay, but for all intents and purposes, the ayin and the aleph sound, if not identical, then very similar. Okay. If you said the Shema with an aleph instead of an ayin in the word, instead of the word Shema, which means hear, you would have the word Shema, which means maybe or perhaps. Okay, so you don't want this line to say, perhaps Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? Maybe Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? No, we're not saying perhaps God is one, maybe God is one. We're saying, listen, God is one, right? So to emphasize the fact that, because they didn't have italics or bold printing, right? So to emphasize the fact that you should be very careful both in your saying and in your understanding that we're saying Shema and not Shema, right? So a big ayin to emphasize that. Similarly, with the dalet at the end of Echad, there's no other letter that sounds like dalet, right? But there's a letter that looks a lot like dalet, and that is the resh, right? It's very easy to confuse. I mean, even sometimes people leading services say a dalet where there's actually a resh, say a resh where there's actually a dalet, right? And there are places in the Bible where it seems pretty clear that at some point it's called a scribal error, right? A scribe makes an error and then it like gets into the canonized or normative text, right? So we want to make sure that you read this with a dalid, echad.
That's what I asked. Yep.
Right, what you asked, and not a resh, acher, which means strange or other. Right? So perhaps Israel, the Lord your God, is strange. No.
Some people think that.
Right. A lot of people think that, but so again, the large echad and then the exaggerated pronunciation of the Dalet is to make sure that everybody understands that the word is echad and not acher. Okay, and then just like El Melech Ne'eman gives you amen, right? Ayin and Dalid make the word aid, which means witness. Right? So by saying the Shema with the large letters, we are witnesses to God's sovereignty, and we are witnesses to God's unity.
When you're going to the finite points of not only the print but the vocalization, is there a difference between amen and amen?
No, it's just
Okay.
different ways of, there's different, Ashkenazi pronunciation and Sephardi pronunciation. And, even though like people say that we use now in our services Sephardi pronunciation, we really don't. I mean, one of my rabbinical school professors actually called it Ashkefardi because it's Sephardic consonants, but it's still Ashkenazi vowels for the most part, as well as where the emphasis fall, which syllable is emphasis. Like if you look, like most of the songs that we sing are written on the assumption of an Ashkenazi pronunciation, like Yismechu b'malachutecha, right? Whereas in like spoken Hebrew, you wouldn't say Yismechu, you'd say Yismechu, right? And
Oh, great. Okay.
right, so like as my mom used to say, because she was a teacher of she specialized in teaching kids with dyslexia. So this stuff was important to her, not in Hebrew. She didn't know how to read Hebrew, but she said, so very often people will put the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
There used to be a
and we are, an Israeli would come into our shul and we are constantly putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. But it's just, so properly it is amen.
okay.
But most of us grew up saying amen.
But I noticed
No.
Even in our services, when we're doing the congregation is, it's not select to the reader, it belongs to the congregation as a response or in conjunction with. Even in regular services, there are some prayers where you can hear the group saying amen, and in other places, I can't cite the prayers, but in other places you'll hear the group saying amen. And the reason I raised the question was because, as you're saying, in this case, it doesn't make any difference. But in the other cases that you cited, just the slightest change in even a sound, never mind a letter, changed the whole meaning. So that now I don't feel quite so stupid about all the little stupid questions that I asked about why do we do or say or whatever, because there really is some meaning to what was confusing me or that I had never
No,
heard.
absolutely. And D, and I guarantee you have said this hundreds of times in your own career, right? The only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. Right. That's why we do this, so that you can ask questions, right? But it's different. It is different traditions. The way people grow up and the way people learn things. And there are tunes that, like when I first came to Kehilat Shalom, I'd never heard before, right? And in fact, to the extent that, when I was a Hillel rabbi, right, and I have on the high holidays 300 kids, right, who probably those 300 kids grew up in 150, 200 different congregations, right? Which every congregation does things a little bit differently. And of course, because look, when I went to college and they did stuff at the Jewish chaplaincy different than they did it at my shul. And I was like, whoa, what is this, right? Because if you only know one shul, the way they do things is the right way, right? So instead of like fighting that, at the beginning of the high holidays, I would say, yes, we have 300 people here. You probably come from 150, 200, maybe even more different shuls. Every shul does something differently. So I am about to lead high holiday services wrong. And just like acknowledge it and live with it, right? But now look, certain things like really are legitimately wrong. But other things are just differences in local practice, local custom, the tunes, the rabbi's preference, the rabbi from 40 years ago preference. I mean, my favorite story about this, which is probably apocryphal, okay, but there was one shul where when you came up to open the ark, like 2 feet before the ark, you would duck and bow and then go to the ark, right? And nobody really knew why you did that, except that that's what people did, right? And somebody traced it back. When the shul started, it met in a basement, and there was a pipe there. Okay, and if you're coming up to the ark, you're either gonna bonk your head into the pipe or duck your head and bow, right? And then when they moved out of the basement, they kept the duck your head and bow thing, right?
Well,
And again, I'm sure that's an apocryphal story, right? But look, we know that. Why do we, why do I do it this way? Because my Zadie, who I love dearly, did it this way, right? My Bubby did it this way, so I do it this way, okay? And most likely, you can't ask your Zadie or Bubby why. And they may say, because that's the way my Zadie did it, right?
Well,
I mean, that's.
there are two things that I have found very unique amongst us. And I've been to a number of different synagogues for different reasons. But
Sure.
growing up, what is the term that's used when men pray? Shucking back and forth?
Shuckling.
Shuckling, okay. I've
Right.
never seen anybody do it this way except you.
Right.
And I've also never seen anybody except in not, and it didn't start with Kim. I came to Kehilat long before I became a member, but I never saw this with or without a strand from the talit to go up when the Torah was raised, except here at Kehilat. So
Whereas I would say everybody does that everywhere, because I've never been to a shul where they didn't do it. But like I said, different people would grow up differently. I mean, it's like the same thing. I mean, I don't, I said this once one Shabbos morning in my Torah introduction, right? That I joked about my dad, that he always the only news station he ever watched was MSNBC, right? And I said the reason that he watched MSNBC is because Yiddish was his first language, and if it's called MSNBC, then it must be MS.
must be true.
Right? Right. It must be. It's on MS, and it wouldn't call it MSNBC if it wasn't MS, right? Yeah, Sue.
I have a question. I don't understand. Like, I personally would rather be speaking with the Ashkenazic pronunciation than go through services in a pronunciation that is neither Ashkenazic nor Sephardic. It's like almost like creating our own. And to me, that doesn't ring good. Like that doesn't seem like what we should either be one or the other to be authentic. And just being like half of one and half of another is not really authentic.
But who decides which
Yeah.
one's authentic?
Well,
Well,
no,
but
I mean,
whichever is better than
right,
the middle.
whichever. No, I mean, look, I get it. I mean, all right, so the thing is, and in pure theory, I agree with you, right? Now, when you are a rabbi or a cantor, for that matter, any change in the way things are done, right? The first question that you must ask yourself is this a hill for which I am willing to die? Right? And if the answer is no, leave it, right? So that, like I mean, I often, and I say this often, right? Like, I am the youngest person present right now, right? I'm not a kid. I just turned 64,
Thank
right?
God.
But everybody my age or younger who grew up in a reform or conservative shul learned the Sephardic pronunciation,
You know,
right? Why? Because that's what they use in Israel. And if you want to say to identify with Israel, or if you want to say so that, when you're learning modern Hebrew, it's, right. So that's what we learned, right? But the tunes that we inherited have a rhythm of the Ashkenazic stress rather than the Sephardic stress.
excuse me.
Okay, now some of those
I,
tunes can
excuse me,
be.
I have to leave. I apologize.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Great. No, thank you. Right. Some of those tunes can be adapted easily, some of them can't. So then, you're telling somebody like Mike Goldman, right? Not only are we getting rid of the pronunciation that you grew up with, we're getting rid of the tunes you grew up with, right? And he might say, well, then you're getting rid of me, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
So when Mike leads services, he does the Ashkenazi pronunciation. He's the only one who does, right? I mean, others like who certainly like Stu grew up with that pronunciation, or probably Stu, maybe Joe, I don't know, but they adapted. Mike didn't adapt. I'm not going to make a big thing out of it, right? I mean, he's going to lead services with his pronunciation that's comfortable to him, because I figure, like I say, in pure theory, I agree with you, but is this a fight I'm willing to have? Right? And the answer is no. And also, I figure, God understands all the pronunciations.
Yeah, no, I think Sephardic or Ashkenazic is legitimate. I just don't like the idea that we're doing Sephardic, but we're not pronouncing it like Sephardim do. That's my thing.
Right. Where I agree with you. I agree with, as does my professor who coined the term Ashkefardi.
Yeah,
right? I mean, when
that's the problem.
when he called it Ashkefardi, he was not being complimentary. But it is what it is, All right, let's.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unless Toby, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had the pronunciation that from the where Israelis use is what's carried over and considered is considered Sephardic. I thought it was just Israel, something that originated with Israelis.
Well, no, all right. So Ben Yehuda thought that the Sephardic pronunciation was more authentic. Okay, but if you actually if you go to Israel now, within Israel, it's interesting. Israel does not have regional accents like we do in this country, but they have communal accents, right? Like you can tell by the way people pronounce Hebrew for sure whether they're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, but then there's a subset like somebody can open up their mouth and I know that they're Moroccan or I know that they're Yemeni, right? So they have not, like I say, not regional accents, but communal accents, right? So the way that Israelis of Moroccan or Iraqi or Egyptian or Tunisian background, Yemenite, is probably closer to the way it was pronounced in ancient Israel. All right. And then the Ashkenaz is further away. And there are sounds that, like Ben Yehuda and, the Ashkenazim who followed him just couldn't pronounce. Right. So that Sephardic Israelis really pronounced the ayin with a very guttural pronunciation. Right, whereas Ashkenazi Israelis, the ayin and the aleph are interchangeable. Right, similarly, Sephardic Israelis, there's a real difference between the het and the chaf. For Ashkenazi, they sound more or less the same. All right, now I try actually to pronounce the het differently than the chaf. Right? I mean, if you hear it, there is a slight difference in the way I pronounce them. But I tend to be like a stickler for that kind of stuff. I still can't really pronounce an ayin. I wish I could, but you have to, grow up. Do it. You have to grow up that way. So, like your late husband's Hebrew was most likely, I mean, I never heard him speak Hebrew, but standard Israeli Ashkenazi pronunciation.
Right.
Right? Not exactly Sephardic, but certainly not Ashkenazic. Right? But, and that's the way most, so for sure, for sure, even if you can't say, oh yeah, Moroccan, Yemenite, Egyptian, Persian, for sure you can say, yeah, Ashkenazi or Sephardi to this day, pretty much.
Okay.
All right. Good night,
That's
folks.
fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Good
Fly
night.
with
You're
Tom.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.